As I mentioned earlier, this is the 30th anniversary of the Children's Network, and we have a special treat this afternoon. We have the founding fathers of the Children's Network. They worked together to form the Children's Network and the Children's Fund at the same time. Judge Muir, I call him Judge Muir Morris. I don't know which he prefers. Judge Muir Morris, Dr. Ray Lyles, and probably the face of the Children's Network, or the poster boy, as I refer to him more often, Kent Paxton. And so they have had a little, they haven't been together for quite a while, and it was just like them sitting down 30 years ago, 32 years ago, when they started talking about how this was going to happen. And so it was really interesting for me to listen to how things formed and, you know, the collaboration that took place within our county even 30 years ago to form the Children's Network and the Children's Fund. So they're going to kind of, instead of me going on and on about the history and this is what we've done and this is what we do, they're going to tell you how it all started. So I think you're in for a real treat this afternoon during lunch. Thank you.
I'm going to start, not Patrick, no.
All right.
Can you hear? Hello? Can you hear this?
Let's do a mic check.
Okay,
Can
let's
you
do a
hear-
mic check.
Can you hear each of us? Can you hear us?
Hello? Yep,
All right.
works. Okay, cool.
We were hoping you couldn't hear Ray, but go ahead, Ray.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to introduce the Honorable Patrick J. Morris, who, as many of you know, was the presiding judge of the juvenile court for many years, and then was the mayor of San Bernardino. He is the architect of the Children's Network, which we're now celebrating the 30th anniversary. And he's going to talk a little bit about how that happened, how that came to be, why and how it came to be.
Thank you very much, Ray. First of all, I want to tell you that there's nothing new under the sun or in the sun. I pulled out from my great files of history an article by Bill Rogers of the Sun newspaper dated May 17th, 1986. And it's entitled, "Grand Jury Criticizes County Child Services." I pick up the Morning Sun newspaper. Have you all seen it? Front page article, Grand Jury Report, Child Welfare Reforms Coming, and the grand jury roundly criticizes children's services in our county. There's nothing new in the sun or under the sun. It is a bit of deja vu. Well, it was 30 years ago, I guess I'll sit beside Ray, 30 years ago that I left the presiding judgeship downtown and came out to juvenile court as juvenile PJ. And I found exactly what the grand jury later found and what the current grand jury apparently now finds. I found overloaded caseworkers. I found silos with each of the departments, nobody talking across the traditional bureaucratic limitations of their jurisdictions. I wanted to take a tour of the Ward B. At the time, juvenile court, county hospital was on Gilbert Street, and the mental health ward was right there next to the juvenile court facilities. So I asked to see the children's ward of Ward B. And the mental health director, Bob Martinez, said, "Children's ward? We don't have a children's ward. We put the children with the adults." So I took a tour. And I found a 10-year-old mentally ill young girl on a daybed outside the door of a mentally ill sex offender. And I was appalled, as you might expect, and I convened in my courtroom then a hearing of all of the leaders of the children's services system, most importantly mental health, and said, how in the hell can this happen? Well, it turns out, of course, that it was a matter of funding, and that we did not have the ability, apparently with mental health funds, to construct a separate children's wing of the mental health ward. But the good news was that as we began to talk about it, we had a lot of people come to the table to help us out, including the private sector, local group of builders, and Good Samaritans came to the table. We had some money we found in the budget of mental health that had not been utilized, that was going to go back to the state, and we were able to talk to John Vasconcellos, then a senator, who headed up a major committee in the Assembly to sponsor a special piece of legislation that allowed us to take that money and invest it as capital funds in the construction of a children's wing of Ward B. And ultimately, and Jack Brown, the CEO of Saders, came to the table and gave some private contributions. We cobbled together enough money to build an 8-bed ward for the children. And I thought, okay, if we have a conversation across historical lines of responsibility, we can get some things done. I had been the presiding judge of the Superior Court and therefore the advisor to the grand jury for several years. And I still had a lot of friends in the grand jury, so I appeared before them and asked them to do an investigation of all the children's services in our county. And they said, we don't have the money to do that. I said, go to the board and ask them for some money to do a management audit. I said, when you ask, the board gives. And they went down and they got $35,000 from the county board to do a management audit of all the services rendered to children in our county. And they hired Harvey Rose, a CPA firm out of San Francisco, to do this audit. And that audit was a wonderful vehicle for change making. We had an opportunity, all of us in leadership roles in children's services, to talk to these auditors. And they came out with a very critical report in 1985 saying the services of this county for children is underfunded, it's disjointed, there is no conversations across bureaucratic lines. You need to have a better design for children's services. And that led to the organization of a committee of major leaders across the spectrum of services to children. And it took us a year to put together what became ultimately the design of the Children's Network. And at that point, we went out to look for a talent that would lead this network because it was a network in theory only. And we found this guy named Dr. Ray Lyles, who is a change maker by character and personality. And he agreed to take on this job that people said would not last 6 months. And 30 years later, we're still here. So I'm going to turn to Ray and have him talk a little about taking on the responsibility of our first leader of the network as a professional in the design of what would become this broad policy council that was to meet monthly in the county government center with every department head who rendered children's services across the landscape of county services. So Ray, tell us about putting it all together.
Okay. So I was the first Children's Network coordinator, and this was 30 years ago. And as Judge Morris just told you, this is the plan that a number of innovators came up with. And the network, as it was designed over that year, was fairly complex. It had 7 components that needed to be organized. And when I asked Judge Morris about it, he told me the structure, and he said, well, you know, we're going to coordinate all children's services. And I was thinking, you mean like child maltreatment services, like child and family services? He said, no, all children's services. Anything anybody has to do with children in this county at both public and private levels, we're going to coordinate that during using one of these 7 levels. And that's how we're going to do it. And I said, what? All of you practice that. What? Because if you can remember back to 1986, nobody was saying that. Nobody was saying, what? And I think that actually the Children's Network should get credit for inventing that expression. You know, so what happened was we started with the Policy Council, and I said, well, who's on the Policy Council? And he said, well, all the agency heads that have anything to do with children's services, which meant you know, the head of DPSS and the one that was under him in terms of head of children's services, the director of mental health, the chief probation officer, the district attorney, the head librarian for the county, the head of Head Start, the superintendent of schools. Who have I left out?
Sheriff,
The sheriff.
public defender.
David McKinnon was there, all these people. And then I think Patrick, trying to sell me on this, said, and the chairman of the board is going to be there. And I said, Sinatra is going to be there? And he said, no, not Sinatra, the chairman of the board of supervisors. But I decided anyway that even though Sinatra wasn't going to be there, that we'd go ahead with that. So in fact, we did. And being the coordinator, somebody asked me one time, what's your job as coordinator? And I had been a coordinator in another county for many years of an interagency program. And I said, basically, it's to put the chairs in a circle. And then at the end of the meeting, try to get people to put them back where they belong, you know. And that's pretty much what I did for several years, is put the chairs in a circle and try to get people to put them back and have some kind of meaningful discussion at all these different levels during that period of time.
One of the questions that came up as we discussed this, because all these chairs would be at the table, I think we had a total of almost 18 different departments. The question was raised by Chuck Terrell, the county superintendent of schools, is my budget at risk? If I come to this table, are you taking my money away from me? And I told Bob Hammock, the county board chairman, that's a hell of an idea. Let's put their budgets at risk. If they're not there to protect their budget and engage in conversation about collaborative thinking and problem solving, then as chairman of the board, you know, we can begin to steal money from people who are absent from the table. And that became the ultimate threat that brought everybody to the table. My budget's at risk, I better damn well show up.
It not only brought everybody to the table, but it made people think seriously about coordinating children's services. And one of the ways that happened in terms of the dynamics, it was hilarious to me. If you can imagine these 18 people, all department heads of these major departments, $1 million budgets, you know, that kind of stuff. And then there was a little table like this, and there was Patrick J. Morris, who was the convener, chairman of the board of supervisors, who was not Sinatra, and me sitting up there, and we would discuss things, you know, about how things needed to be coordinated, and there would be some kind of an issue. And Judge Morris would listen to it, and after a while, he would say something like, well, I think that one solution to this problem might be, and he'd come up with a good idea. And then as I was watching this, I would watch all the department heads turn and look at Bob Hammock, the chairman of the board. And if his head went like this, they all voted for it. You know, it's like, yep, we'll do that, you know.
On the other hand, money is like hair. Either you have it or you don't. And you can make collaboration work without it.
That's true.
That's true.
That's true. So some of the things that happened in the couple of years that I was there as the kind of implementer was, number one, we got all these things going. You know, somebody asked me at one point, what's your job description as coordinator of the Children's Network of San Bernardino County? And I said, oh, my job description. Now you have to remember, this was 1986. There was no email then, you know, there was barely an internet, you know, things were very different. And I said, well, my job description is I go to meetings for which I have not had time to fully prepare. So I ad lib. This is followed by brief, intense periods of calling people who are not there to arrange future meetings. And that's what I did for a couple of years, you know. So in one of these meetings, one of the things that happened that I thought was kind of interesting is, having been in another county that had some interagency stuff going on, in the first year that the network was in operation, I said to the people I was sitting with, have you ever had a children's conference in this county? All over children's conference about a variety of different children's issues, and the answer was no. And I said, well, let's have one. So we took it to the policy council, and the policy council said, sure, let's have a children's conference. So we organized one, and the first children's conference, number one, you're sitting at number 30. Number one was held at Cal State San Bernardino in 1987? 1986. And it was just a wonderful thing. It had this many people crammed into a space, into the largest room they had at Cal State San Bernardino. It was just one day long. We had how many different workshops?
14 workshops.
14 workshops, and our keynote speaker was an educational psychologist, a PhD in educational psychology and folk singer, who is extremely well known, named Peter Alsop. Any of you know Peter Alsop's work? Go right to the internet and look it up if you're interested in children's services, because he has album after album after album of songs related to children's issues and adult issues as well. But they were pretty good stuff. So he's our keynote speaker. So he comes out and he starts singing these songs, and you have to sort of visualize that rather than sitting at tables, we were sort of sitting next to each other in rows. And he starts singing these songs, and he asks everybody to stand up. So everybody stands up, and then he asks them to hold hands. And then he starts singing this song, right? And the song is, "It's Only a Wee Wee, so what's the big deal?" And I looked over and I saw, the head of mental health services holding hands with the head of DPSS, holding hands with the chairman of the board, not Sinatra, holding hands singing "It's Only a Wee Wee, so what's the big deal?" And then after that they sang, "I'm a pizza." And it was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing to see. It was just amazing. I thought we've started something magical here. So Patrick was going to be our luncheon speaker. So after this morning thing where Peter Alsop had everybody standing up and singing and really getting into it, Patrick comes up to me during the break and he says, "Ray, I got to go home for a few minutes, but I'll be back. I'm the luncheon speaker, and I will be there on time." And so he was, and he...
So I thought Peter Alsop set the pace for the day, and I thought I had a speech, and it was based upon Bob Dylan's song, "Times They Are A-Changin'." Anybody recall that song from the 1960s? And so I got a guitar and my harmonica, and I played the song. We sang the song. Everybody at the time knew the song. You all are a new generation of non-singers. At the time, we all sang the various verses of Dylan's "Times They Are Changin'," and I coordinated my thoughts or my speech with the song, and we had a great time.
So this magical thing that happened called the Children's Network Conference, we had Peter Alsop having all these department heads holding hands singing "It's Only a Wee Wee, so it's a big deal." The presiding judge of the juvenile court goes home, gets his harmonica, comes back and plays and gets us to sing at lunchtime. It was an amazing, amazing thing. So that was the first Children's Network Conference, as well as all the different workshops and that sort of thing. And in the ensuing years, I have been really pleased to see that it's continued. And a couple of times, I've come in and presented a workshop over those years, but it was really fun.
Yeah, well, and there came a point after Ken came on board, we were honored by several major national foundations, and we were invited to make a presentation on national public television with Bill Moyers. Who recalls Bill Moyers? Well, Bill Moyers did this special out of the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina, where they invited 4 programs from across the nation that were making a difference in the lives of kids. And ours was one of those 4 programs. And it was broadcast to every state capital, to the legislators and the governors of 50 states that night by national public television. And so we were able to show the efficacy of our work in this network to a national audience that in many cases adopted our vision. And so across the nation today, there are hundreds of counties who have a children's style network that does the very kind of thing that we began to work with back in '86 with Ray as our leader.
That's right. And it's kind of as a precursor to that, one thing that happened in the first couple of years excuse me, is that this was such an innovative model that took a year to design and was so innovative that people began to hear about it. You know, my job was to run around and talk to people about it all over the place, including other counties. And one day I got a call from somebody who said, excuse me, a certain legislator is interested in writing a bill that would encourage other counties in California to have similar children's networks that would meet their needs. Would you write something that possibly addresses that? So I sat down at my Apple IIe computer, this was a long time ago, not connected to the internet, and I pounded out some language about children's networks for other counties. And about a month later, a legislative bill was forwarded to me, and I opened it up and saw my language in this bill encouraging other counties encourage other counties to form children's networks similar to the philosophy of San Bernardino County's children's network. And I was stunned at that. I thought if I had known my language was going to be in a bill, I'd put more thought into it, you know. And ultimately, something came out as a result of that.
Let me,
Go ahead.
I'm going to interject one more thing, because we had a public network. We had all these departments of all the agencies who deliver children's services at the table, but we didn't have the private sector there. And we all agreed that the resources available to us as a county were limited. We had to get the commitment from people in the corporate community and the nonprofit community to buy into this whole idea of a collaborative problem-solving model. And so I took the opportunity to talk to a lifelong friend named Jack Brown, who was the CEO of Stater Brothers Markets. And I asked Jack if he would step forward and he would chair a new nonprofit that we would call the Children's Fund. And he agreed to do that. And he gathered at the table a host of corporate CEOs and others who would buy into the idea of raising private dollars to serve the public's children. And that children's fund's, Stacy, where's Stacy? Stacy, how many dollars has Children's Fund raised devoted to our kids over the last 30 years?
Over the last 30 years.
How many?
Millions.
It probably exceeds $30 million of private money that have been raised to basically devote to the lives of our children in ways that are remarkably beneficial and, in many cases, life-saving. So we added that critical component to the network, and that has remained a vital partner with the public services, commitment of private dollars to these causes that you all invest in as professional service deliverers. And now let's go to the guy who followed Ray Lyles. After Ray did this for a while, he became so famous, his head grew to the point where we no longer could afford him. And he passed the baton to a younger man, although not as well endowed with hair as Ray. He had equal brain power. And we brought on Ken Paxton, who for the next 19 years led our children's services as his professional. And Ken's going to talk a bit about his experience and about the lessons learned in this remarkable journey. Ken?
Your Honor, thank you. I'm up here with the comedy team of Ernest Hemingway Sr. and Jr. I'm not sure which one is which, but thank you, guys. I want to cover 20 years in 20 minutes. We'll make it fast. And I'm going to talk about some chronology, some high points for the network, but also some lessons learned, if I may. I was excited when the grand jury report came out in '85. I started with the county in 1974 as a psych tech on the mental health unit at County Hospital. Then with the children's services in '78, when they were emptying out the state hospitals, and worked in the first group homes that we had, and then was institutions coordinator at CPS. When the network job came along, and I knew that was the job for me because everything I had done was interagency, multidisciplinary by nature. So let's talk about 1988. It was Ray went fishing, didn't come back, recommended me for the job, interim children's network officer. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome.
And in '88, several things happened. One was the legislation that Ray referred to. Went to Sacramento, brand new on the job, met with Willie Brown, who was the Speaker of the Assembly, and Senator Bob Presley. And Senate Bill 997 was developed by the senator and the assembly member, which made the Children's Network as a model. I went up there with Adrian Gaines, who was the first Children's Fund director, and talked to those two legislators, and then went up and down the state, my first couple of years on the job, to 20 other counties doing presentations, all the way from Santa Clara to San Diego. Actually, the Central Coast, I believe Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo still has their children's networks that came out of that. Also in '88, Ray had started the Policy Council. But the value of networking, those of you who are case managers, you know that you have to network with other professionals to get the job done. And so when we talked about high-risk kids and at-risk kids, one of the things that, when I first got on board, was to go talk to the new presiding judge, which was Art McKinster at the time, to get a standing order from juvenile court under Welfare and Institutions Code 827, 829 that allowed us to set up multidisciplinary teams in each region of the county: Victorville, Big Bear, East Valley, West Valley. And as professionals as defined, we were able to take a look at child abuse cases that had multiple referrals to CPS, but no filings. And that was one of my favorite parts of the job for 10 years. I did the EMDT piece. Up and down the county, we heard about 600 on average in-depth, high-risk cases per year. And as I said, the majority of those referrals came from the schools. They had had multiple referrals to CPS. And we were able, every year, to have just about a 95% rate of keeping that family intact. This was before wraparound services. Those of you who may be in wraparound services, before wraparound services, we were able to keep those families together and keep those kids safe. That was a major benchmark for '88. A major point to this whole network idea, a network in the most simplest terms are people. They are all of you. You are the Children's Network. And you know, if you're a case manager, a manager, how important networking is to get the job done for kids, okay? Lessons learned. When I was institutions coordinator at CPS, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd get a call from a social worker saying, this kid just blew out of foster care, a whole myriad of behaviors, problem behaviors. Well, at the time, I had about a half a dozen group home providers. At 4 o'clock on Friday, I could call up and say, would you take this kid this weekend, evaluate him, and then we'll get back together on Monday, see what we can do, okay? That worked, the networking piece of that. And the success to successful networking, whether you're looking at a system, all of you, or your day-to-day work on behalf of kids, it's not just what you know, your clinical expertise, your knowledge about the system, but also who you know. Who can you call to get what you need for that at-risk child you're trying to serve, okay? And that means respecting the value of everyone you work with. When I had Children's Network, I may get a call from the chairman of the board who's concerned about group homes in the county. 15 minutes later, I'd get a call from somebody in Needles who just wanted to volunteer to change the life of a child. And I would take that call, I would take the time to talk to them about becoming a CASA volunteer, what have you. But one of the lessons learned of this whole network experience is your interpersonal relationships, your professional relationships to make the system work for kids. Multidisciplinary teams, I've always loved MDTs. As we moved on to school-based services, we had multidisciplinary teams at school sites. We were able to do multidisciplinary teams in the community. We started one up in Big Bear. I mentioned I was at Children's Services in '78 when the state hospital started to empty and we had the severest of the severe kids coming back to put in group homes. And it was essential. Then there was 3 agencies. I was at mental health, CPS, who was the conservator for those kids, and probation, that we worked together, that we could communicate and coordinate and collaborate to make things work. And that network, that small network, I like to think was a seed for the bigger children's network that came along a few years later. Because with those kids, we had to make sure that they could be reintegrated into the community and not just survive, but thrive, ultimately in our foster care system. So in MDT work, essential. 1991, great opportunity came around, SB 620, actually was still Willie Brown and still Bob Presley, school-based services. When folks think about kids, what do they think about first? Typically, it's about education. It's our schools. That's where the kids are, right? And so Healthy Start allowed us, it actually legislatively took the Children's Policy Council model and put it in a broker role with all of our school districts in the county to talk about getting social workers and public health nurses and clinicians outstationed at our schools. The very first flagship we had was Emerton Elementary in San Bernardino.
In Lincoln, yeah.
And the judge and I went out there.
Yeah, let me make a comment about that. One of the lessons that I've learned in all my years of private and public service, as Kent suggests by his comments, is it's not so much what you know, it is who you know. And taking full advantage of those relationships to build information for problem solving. When Governor Wilson came into office and was looking around for ideas on how to deliver services to kids in schools, we had this tremendous number of newly immigrant families who were in poor families moving from school to school to school with tragic educational results. So how do you stabilize a family in a school? You offer services at the school site, and the school site becomes an institution in which they believe and they want their kids to go there, so they'll stay in their apartment close at hand, attend the local school, because they get diapers there, they get milk there, they get language services there, they get health services there. This Healthy Start program, what was the name of the program?
Yeah, Healthy Start.
Healthy Start.
Right.
They took our model, they took our Children's Network model to create that idea, and then Gail Wilson, the governor's wife, who was a friend of mine at Stanford, I was in their wedding, came down and opened up the Healthy Start program at Lincoln School in our city. And that's all about relationships and building those to the point where you end up with a lot of problem solving that otherwise is not available.
Right. It was the first opportunity for systems integration. It was a major step for this county to bring all the children serving agencies together once a month at the table to take a look at best practice at the case management level, program development, and at the policy level. But then you've got a whole other major system like education. It was an opportunity for the first time to integrate services with education. The very first referral we had at Emerton Elementary, second grader, little girl showed up, took a rock on her way to school and beaned the family dog. Something was going on with that child, and we had already outstationed a mental health clinician at that school. Kids will only achieve at school if their social, emotional, home life, their parent-child interaction is healthy. That's the nexus between education and health and human services in all of our county agencies. So it points to another lessons learned, which is systems integration. The idea that no one system can meet all the needs of a child. Systems integration is essential for good resource and referral at the case management level and to form meaningful partnerships with other systems to develop seamless services to improve outcomes for kids. And over the years, we could spend the next 3 hours talking about different models that were put in place through Children's Network, which was that systems integration piece. The ultimate goal, not just to see how we could make seamless services work, but to improve outcomes for kids, which there again points to another lessons learned, the logic model. How many of you are familiar with the logic model? Right? Needs, assets, outcomes. Whether you're a case manager and you're developing a service plan, what are the needs of this child? What are the needs of the family where this child comes from? Okay, what are ultimately the outcomes I want for that child? We use the logic model. We do it all the time. And one of the lessons at least I've learned in this work in 42 years is it's a thought process that never fails. What are the needs? And you can take a look at that. It translates into systems needs as well, okay? That logic model leads to good policy analysis. Do our programs work as effectively as they should for kids? Do we get the outcomes that we want for kids? If not, we need to change policy. And I suggest to you that the best policy doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up. It comes from our case managers, listening to people in the field who knows what's going on with kids, who can see what's wrong with the system. And that was the great nexus between our multidisciplinary teamwork that we started with the network and the Policy Council. We could take issues that came up as part of our MDT discussions with kids, figure out what was wrong with the system, and take it back to the leadership in this county to fix it. To develop measurable outcomes for kids, not just outputs, not just how many kids we serve every year, but did we actually improve the lives of kids? And actually cost-benefit analysis. Did we save money? Got 2 minutes left. 2 more lessons learned. Evidence-based practice. And over the years, with the network, we have embraced evidence-based practice. About 15 years ago, the first research came out on the social, emotional, neurological impacts of substance exposure with babies, exposure to violence, in utero, and early childhood. We took that research back via Dr. Bruce Smith, who was the maternal child health officer, public health at the time, to the Policy Council, and we took a look at that research and the implications for policy change in the county and best practice. Through Children's Fund, we contracted with Dr. Ira Chasnoff from the Children's Research Triangle, and this was major for me, because all the years I'd had kids on inpatient, had kids in the state hospital, had kids in group homes, and knew that, they had a major Axis 1 diagnosis, and there was a lot of behaviors, and there was a lot of parent-child interaction problems at home, child abuse and neglect, and so on. What struck me about that research was, for the first time, we had a better understanding of what the neurological impacts were on babies and toddlers that 15 years later led to that child in 3rd grade not being able to read, in preschool getting kicked out of preschool for behaviors. By the time they were in middle school, they might have been getting jumped into a gang, and by the time they were 15 or 16, they were in an $8,000 a month group home, okay? So not only did it point the way for things like good neurological, psychological assessment, but it pointed the way towards new therapies like parent-child interactive therapy, like sensory motor integration, real prevention and real early intervention. And that translated into systems change. Alan Rowland was our mental health director at the time, and when I started Children's Mental Health in '78, we didn't see a kid until they were 12, 13 years old. By then, it was too late. For the first time, we could start to see babies and toddlers, thanks to Alan. Administratively, we set it up so that we could bill EPSDT for the first time to provide services to those little ones. The same little ones would have been kicked out of preschool, not reading by 3rd grade, wound up in juvenile justice or mental health long-term, or state prison down the road, costing taxpayers thousands and thousands of dollars a year. So, very briefly, it's just a couple of examples of how interagency collaboration, systems integration, networking has paid off for our kids the last 30 years by improving, we don't know how many outcomes for how many thousands of kids over the years, but also systems change. We have a SART system, screening, assessment, referral, and treatment in place now. It's part of our children's behavioral health system. The heretofore, prior to our discussion about SART at Policy Council, didn't exist. So we're talking about real change for kids. And let me finish with this one point. It requires leadership to make this happen. I worked with a mayor who had a quote from Proverbs chapter 29, verse 18 in his office that says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Where there is no visionary leadership for kids, our kids suffer. Our kids will not thrive. Our kids will not become the adults that we want them to be. Happy, healthy, productive adults. And I suggest to you that all of you, as members of the Children's Network, provide that leadership every day. Whether you're a case manager, a program manager, a department head, our board of supervisors, our presiding judge, it requires that kind of vision, the vision that we all need to work together, talk to each other, support best practice to improve outcomes for kids in this county. Thank you.
I'd like to, Kent said extremely important things, a lot of them, but I'd like to echo one thing that he said. You may remember there was a comic strip called Pogo, and one of the most famous versions of that comic strip was Pogo saying, we met the enemy and he is us. And I think about that a lot in terms of the Children's Network, and that I hear people talk, who are in children's services, talk about the network as if it's something apart from them. The network did this, or the network that, or they, and there is no they. You know, that if you're in children's services, you are the Children's Network. And I heard you use that phrase a couple of times, and that's really important to think about. It's a critical paradigm change to think about the network as something else. Like you're going to the Children's Network conference to see what the network is up to. You're the network. You know, you're it. You're not the enemy, you're the network. And that's a really important concept.
And that's why we convened this first at-risk children's conference at Cal State in '86, so that everybody across these traditional bureaucracies could meet at the same location in a series of workshops together, learn about their shared responsibilities, and commit their professional lives to a collaborative problem-solving model. And I think it has served our county well. It has served this nation well. But you are the successors to what happened in '86, and that's why this conference is here today and tomorrow at the Convention Center. So share well, learn a lot, and then understand what Ray and Kent have just said, and that is that you are the network. Thank you very much.